Welcome to my channel. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Thank you so much.
I am Joshua, 27 years old, and my parents grabbed a microphone at my brother's college graduation to tell 300 people that their second child was completely useless. Before I tell you about how I returned 7 years later as a healthcare CEO to strip them of their power and save the brother they destroyed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The heat inside the Agganis Arena was suffocating. It was May 18, 2018. Boston was experiencing an unseasonable heat wave, but the sweat running down my back wasn't just from the temperature. It was from the sheer anxiety of existing in the same space as my family. I sat in row M, seat 14. That was exactly 12 rows behind my parents and my brother, Matthew. They had the premium VIP seats, the ones reserved for the families of the absolute top-tier graduates. I was handed a standard admission ticket the night before and told to find my own way to the arena. My brother Matthew was the golden boy. He wasn't just graduating. He was graduating summa cum laude with a guaranteed fast-track corporate job waiting for him on Monday. He looked like a statue up there on the stage. Crisp robes, perfect hair, a smile that looked like it was manufactured in a lab specifically to make my parents proud. I watched the back of my father's head from my seat. He wore a custom-tailored suit. My mother wore a designer dress that cost more than my rent for the semester. They didn't look back at me. Not once. The ceremony dragged on for hours. Speeches about the future, about potential, about changing the world. I tuned most of it out. I was just doing my duty, showing up, playing the role of the quiet, invisible younger brother. Then came the parent tributes. They selected 5 families of the highest achieving students to come up to the microphone and say a few words. Of course, my parents were chosen. They walked up the stadium steps like royalty ascending a throne. My mother smoothed her skirt. My father adjusted his tie. The spotlight hit them. My father gripped the microphone. His voice boomed through the massive speakers, echoing off the high ceiling. Matthew has always been extraordinary, he started. He looked at my brother, beaming with a pride I had never, ever seen directed at me. From the day he was born, we knew he was special. Smart, driven, a true leader. He paused. He looked at my mother. They shared a little inside joke smile. Then he leaned closer to the microphone. Honestly, we should have stopped after him. A few people in the front rows chuckled, thinking he was just being a little edgy. But my father wasn't done. He looked right out into the crowd and delivered the punchline. Our second child is completely useless. The room roared. 300 people, maybe more. Parents, students, faculty. They laughed. They slapped their knees. They wiped tears of mirth from their eyes. My mother leaned into the microphone, a wide, perfect smile on her face. Well, at least one of them makes us proud. More laughter. More applause. My father waved at the crowd like a comedian walking off after a killer set. I looked at the stage. Matthew was laughing too. He was shaking his head, pointing at my dad playfully. I sat in row M, gripping the plastic armrests of my folding chair so hard my knuckles were bone white. The sound of the laughter was physical, felt like heavy stones hitting my chest. The applause lasted for what felt like an eternity. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. My ears rang. Couldn't breathe. The air in the arena suddenly tasted like ash. I looked around at the strangers laughing near me. They didn't know I was the useless second child. To them, I was just part of the joke. When the ceremony finally ended, the arena erupted into chaos. Families rushed the floor, holding bouquets of flowers and oversized balloons. Cameras flashed everywhere. People were crying tears of joy, hugging their children, celebrating the start of a new life. I stayed in my seat. I sat there as the rows around me emptied. I waited until the crowd thinned out, staring blankly at the folding chairs scattered across the floor. My legs were shaking when I finally stood up. I walked toward the exit, my head down. I just wanted to get to my beat-up Honda Civic and drive back to my cheap sublet. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't make it to my car. As I crossed the massive concrete parking structure, I heard my mother's voice. Joshua. Hey, wait up. I stopped. I turned around slowly. My mother was power walking toward me in her heels, looking annoyed. My father and Matthew were trailing a few steps behind her. Matthew was holding a massive bouquet of lilies. Where were you rushing off to? My mother snapped. We have reservations at the Capitol Grill in 20 minutes. I stared at her. My chest was heaving. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. You humiliated me in front of 300 people. My father let out a loud, exasperated sigh. He actually rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake, Joshua. It was a joke. Lighten up. You're always so damn sensitive. You told a room full of strangers that I am useless. You said you wished you stopped after Matthew. We didn't say we wished we stopped, my mother corrected, completely missing the point. Your father was just working the crowd. It's a speech. You need a little humor. Why do you always have to make everything about you? This is Matthew's day. Can't you just be happy for your brother for one single afternoon? I looked at Matthew. He was 22 years old, standing there in his graduation gown, holding flowers. I looked him dead in the eyes, begging him silently to say something, to defend me, to tell them they crossed a line. Matthew shifted his weight. He looked at the ground, then up at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. Come on, Josh, he muttered. Don't ruin the mood. Dad was just messing around. Let's just go get steaks. That was the moment. It wasn't the microphone. It wasn't the laughter of the crowd. It was Matthew standing there, choosing his steak dinner over my dignity. He chose the golden cage. He chose them. I'm not going to dinner, I said. My voice was surprisingly calm. The shaking had stopped. The anger had burned out into a cold, hard focus. Fine, my father barked. Suit yourself. Go pout in your room. We'll bring you some leftovers. They turned and walked away. Just like that. They didn't look back. Matthew hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then my father called his name and he hurried to catch up. I stood alone in the dim light of the parking garage. I got into my car. I didn't cry. I pulled out my phone. I opened my contacts. I blocked my mother's number, then my father's, then Matthew's. I opened my social media apps. I blocked every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had been sitting in that VIP section laughing. 11 contacts wiped out in less than 2 minutes. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking structure. As I merged onto the highway, I made a silent vow. I would never ask them for a dime. I would never ask them for help. I would build a life so massive, so unbreakable, that their rejection wouldn't even register as a scratch. I was done being the punchline. 7 years. That's how long it takes for a human body to replace every single cell. 7 years later, I was quite literally a different person. I didn't share a single cell with the boy who cried in that parking garage. It was a Tuesday night in February. I was 27. I was sitting in the living room of my penthouse apartment overlooking the Boston skyline. The fireplace was running. I had a glass of scotch on the coffee table and a stack of quarterly financial reports in my lap. The apartment was dead quiet. It was a peaceful, expensive kind of quiet. The kind of quiet you earn. My phone buzzed on the glass table. I didn't recognize the number. It was a local area code. Normally, I ignore unknown numbers, assuming it's a vendor or an overly aggressive real estate agent. But something made me pick it up. I tapped the screen. It was a text message. 2 sentences. Joshua, please don't delete this. Come home. Your brother has. The text cut off. Just an ellipsis. I stared at the glowing screen. I knew exactly who it was. The cadence, the demanding undertone wrapped in a plea. It was my mother. My heart did a strange, uncomfortable stutter against my ribs. 7 years of absolute silence. Not a birthday card, not an email, not a word through the grapevine. I had completely isolated myself from their world. I didn't even know if they still lived in the same house in Newton. I set the phone down. I picked up my scotch and took a slow sip. The liquor burned a clean trail down my throat. I looked out at the city lights. My brother has... what? Died? Gotten married? Been arrested? A part of me wanted to block the number immediately and go back to my financial reports. That was the smart move. That was the boundary I had built and defended for nearly a decade. But another part of me, a much darker, older part of me, felt a cold sense of curiosity. The golden boy, the one who had everything handed to him, the one they were so proud of. What could possibly have gone so wrong in his perfect, frictionless life that my mother, a woman who would rather swallow glass than admit she needed me, was reaching out to the son she called useless? I didn't reply. I just left the message sitting there on the screen, a digital ghost haunting my living room. I didn't know it yet, but that unfinished sentence was the key to a nightmare. The perfect family facade hadn't just cracked. It had completely collapsed into a pile of rot, and they were desperate for someone to clean up the mess. Part 2.1. The Porsche and the Debt, 1,500 words. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my expensive leather couch and watched the sun come up over the harbor, letting the ghosts of my past drag me backward. People always talk about family trauma like it's one big explosion. A screaming match, a physical fight, a definitive moment of abuse. But for me, the trauma was a slow drip. It was a million tiny paper cuts over 18 years. It was the architecture of our household. We grew up in a massive colonial house in Newton, Massachusetts. Perfectly manicured lawns, black shutters, a wraparound porch. It looked like the set of a family sitcom. Inside, it was a caste system. Matthew was the ruling class. I was the untouchable. I remember the day Matthew got accepted into his prestigious university. My parents threw a catered party in the backyard. They hired a bartender. My father stood on the patio and handed Matthew the keys to a brand new Porsche. Silver, sleek, smelling like wealth and unearned privilege. My mother cried tears of joy. They talked endlessly about his college fund, an account they had been putting money into since the day he was born. It was fully funded. He wouldn't have to work a single day while studying. He could focus entirely on networking and maintaining his perfect GPA. 2 years later, my acceptance letters came. I got into a great state school. I walked into the kitchen with the letter, a rare spark of pride in my chest. My father was reading the newspaper. My mother was making espresso. I got in, I said, putting the letter on the granite counter. My father didn't look up from the sports section. That's nice, Josh. Make sure you check the financial aid package. We just paid for Matthew's semester abroad in London. So you're on your own for tuition. Just like that. No party. No car. Not even a congratulations. Just a cold reminder of my place. I walked out of the kitchen, went to my room, and applied for federal loans. I took on crushing student debt before I even stepped foot on a campus. During my freshman year, I worked 3 jobs. I opened a coffee shop at 5 a.m., smelling like burnt espresso and bleach. I went to classes. I worked at the university library circulation desk until 9 p.m. On weekends, I tutored high school kids in chemistry. I survived on ramen noodles and cafeteria leftovers. I lost 15 pounds my first semester. Meanwhile, Matthew was joining fraternities, taking ski trips to Aspen on my parents' credit card, and bringing home glowing report cards. The difference wasn't just financial. It was emotional starvation. I was drowning in work and debt, and my parents treated me like a ghost who occasionally occupied their guest room during holidays. The hardest part wasn't the work. I learned to love the work. The work was honest. The hardest part was the holidays. Thanksgiving during my sophomore year was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I took a bus home because I couldn't afford a flight. When I walked through the door, my mother immediately handed me a list of chores. Fix the broken hinge on the pantry door. Shovel the driveway. Pick up the dry cleaning. Dinner was always a performance. Matthew sat to my father's right, the seat of honor. I sat at the far end, closest to the kitchen door so I could clear the plates. My aunt and uncle were there, along with my older cousin, David. David was a snake in a Brooks Brothers suit. He always acted like my friend, pulling me aside to ask how my classes were going, nodding sympathetically when I told him I was exhausted. But I learned very quickly that David was a spy. He fed every piece of information back to my parents to make himself look better. "So, Josh," David said loudly across the turkey, "I hear you're working at a coffee shop now. That's character building." My father snorted into his wine glass. "He's building character, all right. Maybe if he spent less time pouring lattes and more time studying, he'd have a GPA like his brothers." I gripped my fork. "My GPA is a 3.8, Dad. And I'm working to pay the tuition you wouldn't cover." The table went dead silent. "You didn't talk back to Richard, ever." My mother slammed her glass down. "Joshua, do not ruin Thanksgiving with your resentment. We provide a roof over your head. We gave you a wonderful childhood. If you choose to be bitter, that's your problem." I looked at Matthew. He was busy cutting his turkey, pretending the conversation wasn't happening. I looked at David, who was hiding a smug smile behind his napkin. Only my younger cousin, Jessica, looked at me with genuine pity. She was the only one in that house who saw the rot underneath the expensive wallpaper. The next morning, I packed my duffel bag and took the bus back to campus 4 days early. I spent the rest of the holiday weekend alone in my dorm room, eating cold pizza and studying for finals. I realized then that my presence in their lives was merely required so they had a baseline to compare Matthew against. Matthew was the success. I was the cautionary tale. They needed me to fail so his light would shine brighter. When I walked away after that graduation ceremony, I had nothing but my diploma, a mountain of debt, and a burning rage that kept me warm at night. I didn't just survive. I weaponized my anger. I started at the bottom of a medical research firm as a data entry clerk. I worked 80-hour weeks. I didn't go out. I didn't date. I didn't sleep. I just worked. I observed everything. I learned how the healthcare system operated, how funding was allocated, how the inefficiencies were bleeding clinics dry. That's when I met Gabriel. He was a brilliant, chaotic software engineer who had the same kind of hunger in his eyes that I did. We started talking in the break room. 2 months later, we quit our jobs and started our own healthcare logistics company in my tiny studio apartment. The first 2 years were brutal. We ate canned soup and slept on the floor. But we had a vision. We built a platform that streamlined clinical research data, saving hospitals millions of dollars in administrative waste. By the time I was 25, we secured our first major venture capital funding. By 26, we were buying out failing regional clinics and restructuring them into highly profitable, efficient medical centers. My salary went from scraping by to numbers I used to think were fictional. We were the quiet giants in the New England medical scene. I bought the penthouse. I bought a custom watch. Not to show off, but to prove to the ghosts in my head that I had won. Every time I signed a multi-million-dollar contract, I heard my father's voice echoing in the arena. "Our second child is completely useless." I used that memory as rocket fuel. I built a chosen family. Gabriel was my brother in every way that mattered. We had a network of loyal employees, mentors, and investors. I was respected. I was needed. I was powerful. And then, right at the peak of my piece, the text message arrived. I spent 2 days ignoring it. But on Thursday afternoon, while I was reviewing an acquisition contract, my phone rang. Same local number. I let it ring. It stopped. Then a voicemail notification popped up. I put my phone on speaker and set it on my mahogany desk. "Joshua," my mother's voice filled my office. It didn't sound like the arrogant, perfectly composed woman I remembered. It sounded brittle, old, terrified. "Joshua, please pick up. I know you hate us. I know. But it's Matthew. He was in a bad car accident a few years ago. He's addicted, Josh. He's taking pills. He lost his job. He's locked in his house and he won't let us in. We don't know what to do. The golden boy is dying, Joshua. Please, you're the only one who can handle this." The voicemail beeped and ended. I sat back in my leather chair. The silence in my office was deafening. Matthew. Addicted. Unemployed. Dying. The words didn't compute. It was like hearing that a robot had contracted a virus. I didn't want to go back. I really didn't. But the hatred I thought I held for my brother suddenly felt hollow. He was blood. And more than that, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to see the collapse of the golden cage. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. My mother answered on the first ring. "Joshua?" she gasped. "Stop crying and tell me exactly what is going on," I said. My voice was strictly professional, the same tone I used when a clinic manager was failing to meet their quarterly targets. She took a shaky breath. It started in 2022. He was rear-ended on the highway. Severe whiplash, herniated discs. His doctor prescribed opioid painkillers. Oxycodone. We thought he was just taking them for the pain. But his behavior changed. He got erratic. He started missing meetings at the firm. "When did he lose his job?" I demanded. "4 months ago," she whispered, like admitting it was a mortal sin. "He got fired." The firm said he was nodding off at his desk. "He moved back to Newton into his own place across town. We've been paying his rent. But he won't let us in. We went by yesterday and looked through the window. It's a disaster, Josh. There are pill bottles everywhere. He looks like a skeleton. He screamed at your father to go away." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Why haven't you called an interventionist? Or a rehab facility? Why are you calling me after 7 years of treating me like I don't exist?" There was a long, painful pause on the line. "Because," she finally said, her voice cracking, "we can't have this getting out. If we call a professional service, it goes on records. People talk. The country club, your father's business partners. If they find out Matthew is a junkie." My blood ran cold. I squeezed my eyes shut. Even now, with their precious golden child dying in a pile of garbage, their first priority was their public image. They weren't calling me to save him. They were calling me because I was the family secret they could use to clean up another family secret. I was the free, off-the-books janitor. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said, and hung up before she could thank me. I didn't drive straight to Newton. I am not a man who walks into a crisis blind. I treat family drama the same way I treat a hostile corporate takeover. I gather intelligence first. I made a few phone calls. One of my investors had connections at the consulting firm where Matthew used to work. Within 3 hours, I had a name. Julian. He was Matthew's former direct supervisor. I tracked Julian down at an upscale bar in downtown Boston that evening. I sat next to him, ordered a bourbon, and slid a business card across the damp mahogany counter. Julian looked at the card, saw my title, and his eyebrows raised. "Joshua? You're Matthew's brother?" Julian asked, looking me up and down. I was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than his monthly salary. "He never mentioned you were in this tax bracket." "We don't talk much," I said smoothly. "I'm looking into his situation. My parents are giving me a sanitized version. I want the truth. How bad was he at work?" Julian sighed, swirling his gin. "Bad. But honestly, your parents are the ones who pushed him over the edge." I froze. "Excuse me?" Julian leaned in closer. "Look, Matthew had the accident. He was in real pain. He wanted to take medical leave. 2 months, maybe 3, to get surgery and do physical therapy. But your dad called me." My jaw tightened. "My dad called you? About his adult son's job?" "Yeah." Richard was furious. "He told me Matthew couldn't afford to take leave right before the promotion cycle. He said it would look weak. He told me to keep piling the work on. Then, I heard Richard telling Matthew in the lobby one day to just take the damn pills and man up. Your dad practically bullied him into staying at his desk. Matthew was popping oxys just to sit in his chair for 14 hours a day to keep his promotion track alive. By the time the pain stopped, the addiction had its hooks in deep." I stared at the ice melting in my glass. The sickness in my stomach was profound. My parents hadn't just watched Matthew fall. They had actively pushed him down the stairs and handed him the shovel to dig his own grave. All so he wouldn't miss a promotion. They sacrificed their golden boy on the altar of their own ego. "Thanks, Julian," I said. I threw $100 bill on the bar and walked out into the cold night air. The anger I felt wasn't the hot, reactive rage of a 20-year-old boy anymore. It was a cold, calculated fury. I was going to tear their kingdom down. Before I drove to Newton the next morning, I sat in my car and opened the Notes app on my phone. I typed out my boundaries. I needed rules of engagement to survive walking back into that house. I will not sleep under their roof. I will not eat a meal with them. I will not engage in arguments about the past. I will not accept fake apologies. I am here for Matthew. Only Matthew. I drove my sleek black Range Rover through the familiar, tree-lined streets of Newton. The neighborhood hadn't changed. The same oversized houses, the same perfectly trimmed hedges. It was a museum of suburban hypocrisy. I pulled up to 47 Maple Street. The house looked exactly the same, right down to the brass knocker on the black front door. I parked in the driveway, deliberately blocking my father's Lexus. I stepped out of the car, adjusted my jacket, and walked up the front steps. I didn't knock. I pressed the doorbell once. A few seconds later, the door opened. My mother stood there. She looked older, her face lined with stress, her hair graying at the roots. She was wearing a casual sweater, but she still had her pearls on. She looked at me, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. She expected the broke, desperate kid who drove away in a beat-up Honda. She didn't expect a man who looked like he owned the bank that held her mortgage. "Joshua," she gasped, stepping forward to hug me. I stepped back instantly. Her arms dropped to her sides. "Don't," I said. My voice was flat. "Where is he?" My father appeared in the hallway behind her. He had lost weight and not in a good way. He looked tired, but the arrogant set of his jaw was still there. "He's upstairs," my father said, his tone defensive. "We brought him here yesterday. Had to drag him out of his apartment. The landlord was threatening to call the cops. He's locked himself in his old bedroom. We haven't been able to get him to come out." I walked past them without another word. The house smelled the same. Vanilla candles and expensive floor wax. I walked up the hardwood stairs. I felt their eyes burning into my back, but they didn't follow me. I reached the end of the hall. The door to Matthew's room was shut. I stood there for a moment, listening. I could hear faint, ragged breathing from the other side. I knocked on the heavy wooden door. 3 sharp raps. "Go away, Dad. I swear to God I'll jump out the window." A voice rasped from inside. It sounded like gargling gravel. It didn't sound anything like my articulate, polished brother. "It's not Dad," I said. "It's Josh." There was a dead silence. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, I heard the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door cracked open a few inches. The smell hit me first. It was a wave of stale sweat, vomit, and the sharp chemical tang of sickness. An eye peered through the crack. It was bloodshot, surrounded by dark, bruised flesh. "Josh," he whispered. "Open the door, Matt." He pulled the door open and stepped back. I walked in. The room was a disaster. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the sun. The floor was littered with crumpled clothes, fast food wrappers, and empty orange prescription bottles. And standing in the middle of it was my brother. He was wearing sweatpants that hung off his hip bones. He was shirtless. His ribs were clearly visible, pressing against his pale skin. His hair was greasy and matted. He was trembling. The golden boy was completely gone. In his place was a terrified, starving ghost. I didn't show pity. I didn't gasp. Working in the medical field had hardened me to the physical realities of addiction. I just looked at him. Matthew collapsed onto the edge of his unmade bed, burying his face in his hands. He started to sob. It wasn't a quiet cry. It was deep, heaving, ugly sobs that shook his entire fragile frame. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry, Josh. I'm a mess. I'm exactly what they said you were. I'm useless." I walked over and stood over him. "You're not useless, Matt. You're sick. There's a difference." He looked up at me, tears streaming through the grime on his face. "You don't understand." Couldn't stop. "Dad, Dad told me if I took the medical leave, I'd lose the promotion. He said the firm would see me as a liability. He told me to push through it. So I took the pills. And then the pills stopped working, so I took more. And then I needed them just to get out of bed. And then I lost the job anyway. I know, I said quietly. I talked to Julian. Matthew flinched at the name. I'm so ashamed. I had everything, Josh. And I ruined it. And the worst part is I let them treat you like garbage. I stood there at my graduation and I laughed. I laughed while Dad destroyed you. I was a coward. I was so terrified of losing my spot as the favorite that I let them throw you away. I sat down on the single chair in the corner of the room. Being the favorite in this house wasn't a privilege, Matt. It was a hostage situation. I got out. You got trapped. Matthew wiped his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at me, really looked at me. You look good. You look strong. I'm doing fine. I tried to find you, Matthew whispered. His voice was fragile, breaking on the words. I frowned. What do you mean? Matthew reached over to his nightstand. His hands shaking so violently, he knocked over an empty pill bottle. He grabbed his phone. The screen was cracked. He fumbled with it, squinting at the harsh light, before holding it out to me. 2 years ago, Matthew said, when things started getting really bad, before I lost my job, but when I knew I couldn't stop taking the pills. I knew I couldn't tell Mom and Dad. They would just yell at me to fix it. I needed help, real help. So I emailed you. I begged you to help me. I took the phone from his trembling hand. I looked at the screen. It was his sent folder in his email app. Date: October 14th, 2023. Subject: Please help me, Josh. Body: I don't know if you'll even read this. I know you hate me, but I'm drowning. The pills are taking over. Dad is pushing me too hard at work. I can't breathe. Please, if you have any heart left for me, call me. I need a way out. I stared at the words. My chest tightened. I had never received this email. I checked the to field. The email was sent to Joshua. Kastner.96@gmail.com. My actual email address, the one I had used since high school, was j.kastner96@gmail.com. I looked up at Matthew. Matt, this isn't my email address. I never got this. Matthew frowned, confusion washing over his exhausted face. What? Yes, it is. I clicked on your contact card in my phone. It's the same contact card I've had for you for 10 years. I tapped on the contact details in his phone. I scrolled down to the edit history. My blood turned to absolute ice. The contact card had been manually edited in September 2023, 1 month before Matthew sent his desperate plea for help. The real email address had been deleted, and the fake one had been typed in. There were only 2 other people who had access to Matthew's phone or his passwords. My parents. They knew he was spiraling. They knew he was looking for an escape hatch, and they deliberately severed his only lifeline to me, just to ensure they kept total control over his narrative. They would rather let him sink into a lethal addiction than risk him reaching out to the useless son and exposing their failure. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Josh, Matthew asked, shrinking back, terrified by the look on my face. What is it? Get up, I commanded. Put a shirt on. We are going downstairs. No, Matthew panicked. No, I can't face them. I can't. You don't have to say a damn word, I said, my voice lethal and calm. I slipped his phone into my jacket pocket. I am going to do the talking. Put a shirt on, Matthew. Now. I walked down the stairs, each step heavy and deliberate. Matthew trailed behind me, clutching the banister like a frightened child. He was wearing a wrinkled gray t-shirt, shivering despite the heat in the house. My parents were sitting in the living room. My mother was nervously sipping tea. My father was pacing by the fireplace, checking his Rolex. They stopped when we entered. Oh, thank God. My mother breathed, standing up. Matthew, sweetheart, come sit down. Joshua, thank you. I knew you could talk some sense into him. Sit down, Richard, I said, pointing at the armchair. I didn't use the word dad. My father bristled at my tone. Excuse me? You don't come into my house and give orders, Joshua. I don't care how old you are. Sit the hell down, I roared. The volume and violence in my voice shocked even me. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My father blinked, stunned by the sheer force of it. He slowly lowered himself into the chair. I walked over to the glass coffee table and slammed Matthew's phone down in the center of it. The sound made my mother jump. October 2023, I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. Matthew tried to email me to ask for help with his addiction. He was desperate. He was drowning, but the email bounced into the void. Do you know why, Richard? My father's face remained blank, but I saw a microscopic twitch in his jaw. I have no idea what you're talking about. Someone went into his phone. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Someone manually edited my contact card. They changed my email address to a fake one. They locked him in his cage and threw away the only key he had. My mother put a trembling hand over her mouth. She looked at my father. Richard, you didn't. Oh, stop the theatrics, Diane. My father snapped, dropping the facade. He stood up, towering over the coffee table. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. Yes, I changed it. So what? Matthew let out a broken sob from the doorway. Why? I demanded, stepping closer to him. I was taller than him now. I didn't have to look up anymore. Because he was having a moment of weakness, my father yelled. He was stressed at work. He was overreacting. If he had contacted you, you would have blown it out of proportion. You would have dragged this family's name through the mud out of pure spite. I was handling it. I was managing his recovery. You weren't managing his recovery, I shouted back. You were managing your reputation. You told Julian to pile work on him. You told him to take the pills and man up so he wouldn't lose a promotion. You drove him into addiction, and then you isolated him when he tried to survive. I gave him everything, my father roared, his face turning purple. I gave him the car, the education, the connections. Everything he has is because of me. He just didn't have the backbone to handle the pressure. The room was vibrating with tension. My mother was weeping openly on the sofa. Matthew was curled in on himself by the door. My father pointed a trembling finger at my chest. You think you can come in here and judge me? You walked away. You abandoned this family. You don't get to waltz back in here and act like a savior. I am the patriarch of this family. I hold the purse strings, and I am making the decisions. He turned to my mother. Diane, call the lawyer. We are getting Matthew a conservatorship. I am taking full control of his finances and medical decisions. We are sending him to that facility in upstate New York. I knew the facility he was talking about. It was a cheap, lockdown rehab center in the middle of nowhere that specialized in absolute discretion, not actual medical care. It was a warehouse for rich people's embarrassments. No, Matthew whimpered. Please, Dad, not there. You don't have a choice, my father barked at him. Then he turned back to me, a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face. And you, Joshua, you can leave. You've had your little moment of righteous anger. But you have no power here. You have no money. You have no standing. You are legally nothing to him. If you try to interfere, I will bury you in litigation. I will use his college fund, his inheritance, everything I have to crush you. Now get out of my house. He thought he had won. He thought he was playing his trump card. He still saw the 20-year-old kid with a mountain of student debt standing in front of him. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just started laughing. It was a cold, dark, genuine laugh. It bubbled up from my chest and echoed in the silent room. My father's smirk faltered. My mother looked up, terrified by the sound. What is so damn funny? My father demanded, his fists clenching. I stopped laughing. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out my phone and a sleek, black titanium business card. I tossed the card onto the glass table, right next to Matthew's cracked phone. "Pick it up, Richard," I ordered softly. My father glared at me, then looked down at the table. He leaned over and picked up the heavy metal card. I watched his eyes scan the engraved silver text. Joshua Kastner, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Aegis Healthcare Logistics and Regional Hospital Network. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the words. His skin went the color of dirty chalk. Aegis Healthcare was the corporate entity that had just finalized the buyout of the clinic network his accounting firm serviced. "That's right," I said, my voice lethal. "I own Aegis, and your accounting firm's largest contract is with my subsidiary clinics. I am your boss's boss, Richard." My father's hand started to shake. The card slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the glass table. This is a joke. This is a fake. "Call Julian," I offered, gesturing to his phone. "Or call the board of directors. They'll confirm it." I took a step closer to him, invading his space, backing him up against the fireplace mantel. "You think you can threaten me with lawyers? I have a legal team on retainer that costs more than your entire retirement portfolio. You want to talk about inheritance? Keep it. I make your net worth in a fiscal quarter." My mother let out a strangled gasp. She looked at me like I was a stranger. And I was. "You're not sending Matthew to some cheap warehouse in New York so you can hide your shame," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "I have already arranged a bed for him at Serenity Ridge in the Berkshires. It's an elite, evidence-based medical detox and trauma center. Costs $50,000 a month. And I am paying for it in cash." My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His absolute control, the foundation of his entire identity, was shattering into a million pieces on the living room floor. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number on speaker. It rang twice. "Dr. Carter speaking." The smooth, authoritative voice of my chief medical officer filled the room. "Dr. Carter, it's Joshua. Is the bed at Serenity Ridge secured for my brother?" "Yes, Mr. Kastner. The medical team is prepped and waiting for his arrival. Complete VIP protocol. No visitors allowed without your explicit, written consent." "Thank you, doctor. We'll be there in 2 hours." I hung up the phone. I looked at my parents. They looked small, shrunken. The grand, terrifying figures of my childhood were just pathetic, aging bullies who had run out of ammunition. "Here is what is going to happen," I dictated, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Matthew is leaving with me right now. You are not going to call him. You are not going to visit him. You have lost your privileges as parents. If you try to interfere with his medical care, if you try to file a conservatorship, I will personally ensure your accounting firm loses the Aegis contract on Monday morning. I will bankrupt you before lunch. Do we have an understanding?" My father stared at me. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, terrified defeat. He slowly, barely visibly, nodded his head. I turned my back on him. I looked at my mother on the couch. "You called me because you thought I was the janitor. You were right. I'm here to clean up your mess." I walked over to the doorway where Matthew was standing. He was staring at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. He looked at the Titan standing in the living room, and he looked at the terrified parents who had controlled him his entire life. "Go pack a bag, Matt," I said gently. 3 days of comfortable clothes. Leave your phone here. You won't need it." Matthew didn't argue. For the first time in his life, he didn't look at my father for permission. He just turned and walked up the stairs. I stood in the hallway waiting. The silence in the house was absolute. It felt like the air pressure had changed after a massive explosion. My mother buried her face in a throw pillow and wept softly. My father stood by the fireplace, staring at the black titanium business card on the table like it was a live grenade. 10 minutes later, Matthew came down the stairs carrying a small duffel bag. He looked pale, sweating, the withdrawal symptoms starting to kick in. But there was a tiny, fragile spark of relief in his eyes. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded. We walked to the front door. My mother suddenly jumped up from the couch and ran into the hallway. Matthew! Wait, please, you can't just leave like this. We're your family. We love you. Matthew stopped with his hand on the brass doorknob. He didn't turn around to look at her. His shoulders hunched. You loved the idea of me, Mom. You loved the trophy. You didn't love me. He opened the door and walked out into the sunlight. I looked at my mother one last time. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no vindication. Just a profound, heavy emptiness where my family used to be. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The click of the lock felt incredibly final. I walked down the driveway to my Range Rover. I opened the passenger door for Matthew. He threw his bag in the back and climbed into the leather seat. I walked around, got into the driver's side, and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw the living room curtain twitch. My father was watching us leave. I didn't look back again. I put the car in drive and accelerated down Maple Street, leaving the perfect white colonial house behind us forever. The drive to the Berkshires took 2.5 hours. For the first hour, neither of us spoke. The silence in the car wasn't the tense, suffocating silence of our childhood dining table. It was the exhausted, shell-shocked silence of two soldiers who had just survived a massive artillery strike. Matthew was shivering. I turned the heated seats on high and adjusted the climate control. I handed him a bottle of water from the center console. He took it with trembling hands, managing to take a small sip before resting his head against the tinted window. We got onto the Mass Pike, the scenery changing from suburban sprawl to dense, rolling forests. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the highway. I didn't know, Matthew finally whispered, his voice hoarse. I kept my eyes on the road. Didn't know what? That you built all of this. That you were a CEO, a millionaire. I thought you were struggling. Dad always told me you were probably working a dead-end job, drowning in debt. He used you as a threat. Work harder, or you'll end up like Joshua. I let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, well, spite is a hell of a motivator. I paid off my student loans 3 years ago. I built Aegis from nothing. Gabriel and I slept on the floor of my apartment for 2 years coding the logistics software. Matthew turned his head to look at me. I'm so proud of you, Josh. I really am. You did what I never had the guts to do. You walked away. I gripped the leather steering wheel. Hearing my older brother say he was proud of me, something I had craved my entire childhood, felt strange. It didn't heal the past, but it shifted the weight of it. You were trapped, Matt, I said quietly. They conditioned you to believe that their love was conditional on your performance. You didn't have a choice. I was the useless one, so they left me alone. My neglect was my freedom. Matthew wiped a tear from his cheek. He looked out the window at the passing trees. Do you hate me, Josh? The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. I thought about the graduation ceremony. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners. I thought about the years of being ignored while he shined. I used to, I answered honestly. I hated you for a long time. I hated you for not standing up for me in that parking garage. But I don't hate you anymore. I saw you in that room today. I saw what they did to you. We're both victims of Richard and Diane Kastner. They just used different weapons on us. Matthew let out a breath that sounded like a sob. I'm going to get better. I promise you, Josh. I'm going to beat this. I don't want to be their golden boy anymore. I just want to be your brother. We'll start with getting you clean, I said. A genuine, small smile touching my lips for the first time all day. Then we'll work on the brother stuff. We pulled into the private, gated entrance of Serenity Ridge just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The facility looked like a luxury lodge, surrounded by pine trees and absolute quiet. A team of medical professionals was waiting for us at the front entrance. I parked the car. I walked Matthew up to the front doors. He looked terrified, his body physically aching for the drugs, but he kept moving forward. I handed him off to Dr. Ryan, the intake coordinator. Matthew turned around before he walked through the security doors. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate kind of hope. "Thank you, Josh, for coming back. I got you, Matt. I always got you." The doors closed behind him. I stood alone in the crisp mountain air. The storm was finally over. Now, the real work of rebuilding could begin. The first 30 days were a living nightmare for my brother. I didn't see it in person, but I heard about it. I was back in my penthouse in Boston, running my company, while Matthew was 70 miles away in the Berkshires, fighting a war inside his own body. Dr. Ryan, the lead physician at Serenity Ridge, called me twice a week with updates. He didn't sugarcoat anything. The opioid withdrawal was brutal. Matthew suffered through the sweats, the tremors, the bone-deep aches, and the crushing psychological despair that comes when your brain is suddenly deprived of the chemical blanket it relied on for years. There were days when Matthew begged to leave. There were nights when he screamed at the nurses, demanding his phone so he could call our father and beg to be taken back to the comfortable cage in Newton. But I had made sure the facility was an absolute fortress. My legal team had drawn up airtight medical proxy documents. I essentially held temporary medical custody of his treatment. Richard and Diane Kastner could not penetrate those walls with their money or their lawyers. For the first time in his 29 years of life, Matthew had to face his demons without our parents swooping in to manage the optics. By week 6, the physical storm began to pass, and the real work started. The mental excavation. We began our joint family therapy sessions virtually. Every Wednesday at 4 p.m., I closed my office door, opened my laptop, and logged into a secure video portal. It was just me, Matthew, and his primary therapist, a sharp, empathetic woman named Dr. Evans. We did not invite our parents. They were the disease. You don't invite the disease into the operating room while you're trying to heal the patient. Seeing Matthew on the screen for the first time was jarring. He looked exhausted, but the sickly gray pallor was gone from his skin. He had put on a few pounds. His eyes, which had been dead and vacant in that dark bedroom, were starting to clear. During our third session, Dr. Evans asked a question that blew the doors off our entire childhood. She looked at the camera and said, "Matthew, I want you to tell Joshua what it actually felt like to be the golden child. Don't tell him what your parents wanted him to see. Tell him the truth." Matthew looked down at his hands. He took a long, shaky breath. "It felt like walking on a tightrope over a volcano," he said softly. "Every single day. If I got an A- instead of an A, Mom would stop talking to me for a week. If I didn't make the varsity team, Dad would look at me with this absolute disgust. I wasn't a son to them, Josh. I was an investment. I was their retirement plan for their egos. I knew that if I slipped even an inch, they would drop me. I saw how easily they threw you away when you didn't fit their mold. I was terrified of becoming you." I sat in my leather chair, staring at the screen. The resentment I had carried for a decade began to evaporate, replaced by a profound sorrow. "And Joshua," Dr. Evans gently pivoted to me, "what do you want Matthew to understand about your experience?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I want him to know that being ignored doesn't hurt less than being pressured. It just hurts differently. You were a trophy on a shelf, Matt, but I was the dirt under the rug. I had to build my own life from scratch because I knew no one was coming to save me. I had to become ruthless just to survive." Matthew looked at the camera, tears spilling over his eyelashes. "I'm so sorry I didn't reach down to pull you up, Josh." "I know," I said, "but we're here now." It was during Matthew's 8th week of rehab that the past reached out and tried to drag me back down. I was reviewing the salary structures for a newly acquired clinic in Rhode Island when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 7 years. Aunt Sarah. She was my father's younger sister. She was always the quiet one at family gatherings, constantly overshadowed by my father's booming, overbearing presence. I hesitated, wondering if my parents were using her as a pawn to get to me. I pressed answer. "Hello, Sarah." "Joshua." Her voice was fragile, trembling like a dry leaf. "Please don't hang up. I heard what happened. I heard you took Matthew away to a facility. Your father is furious. He's threatening to cut everyone out of the inheritance. He's completely losing his mind. Let him keep his money, Sarah. I don't need it, and Matthew doesn't want it. I know, she sobbed suddenly. I know you don't. Joshua, I am calling because I need to confess something. The guilt is eating me alive. I haven't slept in weeks. I set my pen down. What did you do? It's not what I did, she cried. It's what I didn't do. Last year, around Thanksgiving, I went over to your parents' house. Your mother asked me to fix a setting on her iPad. While I was doing it, her email application was open. I saw a folder labeled Matthew Intercepts. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. Explain. Sarah sniffled loudly. Your father hired a private tech consultant. They mirrored Matthew's phone to your father's laptop. They saw everything. Every text, every email. They knew he was trying to contact you. They intercepted the messages and changed the contact information. I saw the emails Matthew wrote to you, begging for help. I saw them, Joshua. And you didn't say a damn word? I said, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. I was terrified, Sarah pleaded. Your father manages my husband's accounting firm. He controls our business loans. If I crossed Richard, he would have ruined us financially. I have kids in college, Joshua. I was scared. But seeing what they did to Matthew, watching him waste away while they just tried to hide him, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I am so sorry. I should have warned you. I closed my eyes. The sheer, staggering level of manipulation was almost impossible to comprehend. My parents had essentially built a digital prison around their own son to protect their reputation. They monitored his descent into addiction and blocked his only exit route. Listen to me, Sarah, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I appreciate you telling me the truth, but you are a coward. You let my brother suffer because you were worried about your husband's salary. Do not ever call this number again. I ended the call and blocked her. The confirmation of the truth didn't make me angry. It made me incredibly grateful that I had walked away when I did. My parents were not just flawed people making mistakes. They were a toxic, destructive system. 90 days, 3 full months. On a bright Tuesday morning in late May, I drove my Range Rover back up the winding mountain roads to Serenity Ridge. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine needles and fresh earth. Felt like a fitting day for a resurrection. I parked in front of the main lodge and walked into the reception area. 10 minutes later, a door opened down the hall. I almost didn't recognize him. Matthew walked toward me, carrying the same small duffel bag he had brought with him. He had gained 20 pounds of healthy weight. His skin had color. His hair was cut short and neat. But the biggest difference was his posture. The crushing, invisible weight of our parents' expectations was gone. He stood up straight. He looked like a man, not a frightened child wearing a corporate suit. He dropped his bag and hugged me. It was a real hug. Tight, desperate, and overflowing with gratitude. You did it? I told him, clapping him on the back. I did. He smiled. A genuine, easy smile I hadn't seen since we were little kids playing in the backyard before the grading and the comparison started. And I'm never going back. We drove back toward civilization, but we didn't go to Newton. We didn't even go to Boston. Matthew had made a decision during his therapy sessions. He needed a completely clean break. I drove him to a quiet, working-class suburb in western Massachusetts. With my financial backing, which he treated as a strict loan he swore to repay, he moved into a sober living community. It was a modest house shared with 4 other men in recovery. No luxury, no status. Just accountability, chores, and evening meetings. 2 weeks later, Matthew got a job. Not at a prestigious consulting firm. Not in a high-rise office building. He got a job at a local independent bookstore. He stocked shelves. He organized the history section. He ran the cash register. He made $15 an hour. I drove out to visit him one Sunday afternoon. I walked into the bookstore and watched him for a minute before he saw me. He was recommending a biography to an elderly woman. He was patient, kind, and completely relaxed. The frantic, ambitious energy that used to radiate from him was completely gone. We went to a diner next door and ordered black coffee and pie. Dad sent a lawyer to the sober house last week, Matthew said casually, taking a bite of cherry pie. I set my fork down. Are you serious? What did he want? He wanted me to sign a document releasing my college fund trust to him, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own finances. And he brought a letter from Mom, begging me to come home and take a job at a friend's logistics firm. They want me back in the fold. They want the golden boy back. What did you do? Matthew smiled over the rim of his coffee mug. I told the lawyer to get off the property before I called the police for trespassing. And I threw the letter in the trash without opening it. I leaned back in the vinyl booth, staring at my older brother in awe. The boy who used to panic over a B- had just looked our father's high-priced attorney in the eye and sent him packing. I don't want their money, Josh, Matthew said, his tone dead serious. I don't want the trust fund. I don't want the inheritance. This dirty money comes with strings that wrap around your neck and choke you. I like my life now. I like the bookstore. I like my roommates. I sleep 8 hours a night. For the first time in my life, I am exactly who I want to be, not who they demand I be. He had done it. He had finally stepped off the tightrope. That night, I drove back to Boston with a profound sense of peace settling over my chest. The war was over. I had won, but more importantly, Matthew had won. A few weeks later, my company, Aegis Healthcare, officially closed our largest acquisition deal to date. It was a milestone that solidified our dominance in the regional market. I was named CEO of the Year by a major business journal. My face was on the cover. I didn't send a copy to my parents. I didn't care if they saw it or not. Their validation was no longer the currency I dealt in. Instead, I celebrated with the people who actually mattered. Gabriel rented out the private dining room of a high-end steakhouse downtown. Dr. Carter was there, along with the core executive team who had fought in the trenches with me for years. We drank vintage champagne and ate dry-aged ribeyes. Gabriel raised his glass, clinking his fork against the crystal. To Joshua, he announced, grinning across the table. The man who sleeps less than a medical resident and works harder than a freight train. You built an empire out of thin air, my friend. We are all incredibly proud to stand beside you. The table erupted in applause. I looked around the room at these brilliant, loyal, driven people. Dr. Carter gave me a respectful nod. Gabriel shot me a brotherly wink. This was my family. Blood is an accident of biology. It dictates who you share genetics with, but it does not dictate who you have to tolerate, who you have to love, or who gets a seat at your table. Family is the people who stand in the fire with you. Family is the people who want to see you win, not the people who use your failures to make themselves feel taller. I raised my glass back to them. I had never felt more wealthy in my entire life, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the numbers in my bank account. Time has a funny way of smoothing out the sharp edges of trauma. You don't forget, but the memories stop cutting you every time you touch them. It has been nearly a year since I walked into that ruined bedroom and pulled my brother out of the darkness. Matthew is still sober. He was promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore. He's dating a woman who teaches elementary school art. They go hiking on the weekends. He looks incredibly happy. We talk on the phone twice a week. We are finally building the brotherhood that our parents stole from us. Last week, my assistant walked into my office and handed me a stack of mail. Mixed in with the corporate letters and vendor invoices was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. The elegant, sweeping cursive of Diane Kastner. It was a Christmas card. I sat at my desk and stared at the envelope. 7 years ago, a piece of mail like this would have sent me into a tailspin. I would have agonized over whether to open it. I would have desperately hoped for an apology, a sign of remorse, a shred of parental love. I picked up the envelope, felt heavy. There was probably a long letter inside. Maybe excuses, maybe blame, maybe another attempt to manipulate me into bringing Matthew back into their web. I didn't open it. I held it over the silver trash can next to my desk, and I dropped it. It landed with a soft thud against the bottom. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt completely indifferent. People constantly ask me if I have forgiven my parents. Society puts a massive amount of pressure on victims to forgive their abusers. We are told that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We are told that family is everything, and you must always find a way to reconcile. But I learned a very hard, very liberating truth over the last year. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two entirely different concepts. I have forgiven Richard and Diane Kastner. I have forgiven them because I finally understand that they are broken, empty people who are entirely ruled by their own insecurities and obsession with public image. I forgive them because holding on to the hatred was keeping me tied to them. Letting go of the anger was the final step in cutting the cord. But I will never reconcile with them. You can forgive a snake for biting you because it is in the snake's nature to bite. But that doesn't mean you invite the snake back into your house to sleep in your bed. My parents are dangerous to my peace and to my brother's survival. I don't wish them harm, but I do not wish them to be in my life. I have established a boundary of absolute zero contact, and that boundary is made of reinforced concrete. They made their choices in that auditorium 7 years ago. They made their choices every time they pushed Matthew toward the edge to save face. Now they get to live in their massive, perfectly decorated, perfectly empty house with their money and their reputations entirely alone. That is the consequence of their architecture. If you have made it this far into the video, I want to say thank you. Sharing this wasn't easy, but I know I am not the only one who has walked this path. I want to leave you with this lesson, something I had to learn through years of pain and struggle. You do not owe your abusers a place in your life just because you share a bloodline. Toxic family systems rely on guilt and obligation to keep you trapped in your assigned role. Whether you are the useless scapegoat or the pressured golden child, you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to resign from a job you never applied for. Healing doesn't always look like a Hallmark movie where everyone hugs around a turkey dinner at the end. Sometimes, healing looks like blocking phone numbers, walking away from inheritances, and building a beautiful, quiet life far away from the people who broke you. Your peace of mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own. Protect it fiercely. I would love to know what resonated with you the most in this story. What is the biggest lesson you are taking away from my experience? Please leave a comment down below and share your perspective. Or, if you simply agree that setting hard boundaries is necessary for survival, just comment the word good so I know this message reached the right people. Thank you for listening, for validating my journey, and for being part of this incredible community. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.
Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like and subscribe for new content.